Welcome to another episode of Corporate CPR, where we breathe life back into your organization projects and processes, giving you insights to recovery and avoiding corporate mortality events. Today, we'll be talking about how your meetings might be killing your company. And joining us to contribute to the conversation is Stefanie Krievins. Welcome, Stefanie.
Hello, Jana. Thanks for having me.
I'm so glad you could join us. Can you share a little bit about your background?
Yeah, thank you. So I am the president of the Change Architects, and we really focus on the people and process part of change management, why people do and don't change inside of our organizations, because change is the air that we now breathe, and the future is going to continue to demand of us, our organizations, our workforces, a continuous upskilling. And that's exactly what we provide companies with. Mostly, above 1,000 employees, usually IT organizations with 100 to 1,000 employees. But by way of background, how I got here, started out as a life coach because I wanted to help people find their purpose, and transitioned into executive coaching with small businesses, then started working with IT functions. It was I just felt like, every quarter I was stepping in up and into a new evolution of business challenges and business sizes. And the pandemic hits and all eyes are on IT. And I'm walking alongside several IT leaders during some really crucial and critical times and helping them understand how to communicate with influence, how to keep their people engaged during some really trying times. And from there, change architecture was born because it was my belief, and from seeing these leaders deal with the next thing and the next priority, and just all this information coming at us all of the time in the 21st century, plus cybersecurity concerns, plus developing our people, plus. I was like, we need a unifying strategy for change management. You don't need another program that just exists in a silo inside of your organization or another thing to do. We need something to bring it together, and that's the change architecture. So it's a bit about how I
And
view the world and how we help.
yeah,
Yeah.
no, excellent. Well, I think this would be a great conversation. So, when you're thinking about, I guess, what is the importance of this? Going to sound like a silly question, but I think given your background, you'll make it a great answer. But what is the importance of meetings in a company?
Yeah, there's something about meetings that we've just kind of reduced to like this thing that we get together in a physical and virtual room and we talk at each other. And
Mm,
my perspective starts with meetings are incredibly expensive uses of company time and people thinking time and resources. They must be the most valuable. Like that should be bottom line. The amount of time that we spend, let's say we get three executives together in a room for 30 minutes, the company, in essence, has just spent $3,000. Did the company get $3,000 to $12,000 worth of investment out of that? If the
mm,
answer is not yes, we've got to have better meetings. So in some ways, it's as simple as that. And in some ways, when you look at the statistics, employees and all the way up to executives are spending anywhere between 25 to 50% of their time in meetings every single week. And most people will say in corporations, we don't have anything to show for it. Why is
mm.
that acceptable? Like, why is that acceptable that we are saying yes to things that are wastes of time? And so, when you look at it from a company perspective, again, expensive use of time, it must be valuable use of time. If you look at it from an individual energy perspective, can you say at the end of every day and every week you've delivered value? You feel good about what you've accomplished in your job. And if meetings are adding to that, awesome. We know that in general, they're not. So let's change it up. And when it comes to change, when you get 3 to 5 to 8 people together in a room, you should be driving change. You should be driving new decisions, new ways of thinking, brainstorming something really impactful because you all got together and had a conversation or had a thought process that you couldn't do on your own. That's the purpose of meetings, not to get together and hear somebody talk.
Well, I guess before we dive into maybe what makes a good, the elements of a good, effective meeting, what
Yep.
are your thoughts about those companies and or people who are like, we don't need to have meetings. Like, let's get rid of all the meetings, or
Oh, yeah, the other end
that
of the
type of response.
spectrum. Yes,
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, you certainly hear that in some of the very forward-thinking organizations. They are definitely, the studies show that innovation is happening when people get together physically and brainstorm and come up with new ideas. So if you're not having enough of the right kind of meetings, you're killing innovation. Like that's just plain and simple. To have
Mm,
no meeting days so people can do deep work, that's a great tactic to drive value and to drive purpose inside of roles. Um,
mm,
I would say, if you are if it is a culture that has no meetings, then you're probably creating silos of information and work. Also, not effective ways to manage organizations. Um, but if you do truly have teams of individual contributors where their work is just their own and they're just delivering it in a very focused, intentional, kind of closed off way, that could make sense. I've never interacted with one of those organizations though. So
yeah.
that's perplexing to me, I'll have to say.
Well, and I guess before I go to deeper there, what
Yeah.
about, I have people who are like, well, why do we have to have a meeting? I'll just call somebody up when I need to talk to them. And I'm like, well, that's still a meeting. I mean, like, whether it's scheduled on the calendar or you've now interrupted their day, it's still a meeting.
It is. It is. I think
Mhm.
there's a time and place for all of it. I think it depends on what the intent is. I'm a solid Gen Xer who remembers the cubicle days where both one,
Mm,
you didn't bother people in the cubicle, and every day at 8:30, somebody would walk by with a cup of coffee and say, "Hey, what's going on?" I think that's more personality dependent and cultural dependent
mm,
versus, hard and fast practices. I remember I used to work for an HR consulting company, and our culture was very much you came in, you put your head down, you introverted through the day, and you got your work done. And I am to put it mildly, an extrovert. And
mm,
so to be in a culture where it was very taboo to not talk to anybody unless you were talking about business in a meeting, I was not a great cultural fit. But one of my workarounds was to stop by people's desks every morning at about 8:30 and be like, "Hey, how are you? Can I ask you this quick question about this project that I'm working on?" It was very intentional on my part. And the CEO went out of her way to tell me that that was very disingenuous of me and I looked very fake. And I was like, that's interesting because that is the most intentional, genuine thing I do all day because I'm an extrovert living in a cubicle farm where I'm constantly on display and not supposed to talk to anybody all day. I think I'll see my way out.
mm.
That was painful.
Absolutely.
That was painful.
Yeah, so we operate in a lot of project environment, which can be different, a little different than operational environment.
Sure. Sure.
But in a project environment, which it sounds like you're very familiar with too, um, I find meetings to be very critical. One, to make sure you're making effective decisions and that all the key people are included in the
Yep.
decision and that people aren't missed. But then two, um, a constant alignment. A lot of times if I'm running the project, I'll have a daily stand up, that's 15 minutes where, and yes, it's taken from agile style. I use it even on non-agile projects, but it's
Yep.
just a point to make sure that people are going to be able to get their work done that day and there's no blockers. And if they need coordination, other people are aware, as well as like a once a week project meeting where it's a deeper dive into any sort of key discussions. And then to tie it back to what we are talking about before, that you mentioned, is like oftentimes um, is executives of these corporations will try to push back and be like, oh, this feels like a lot of meetings.
Mhm.
How are we supposed to get our work done? And it's like, well, how are you supposed to get your work done if you can't collaborate? Like, so I'm just curious what your thoughts are.
Yes. Part of what I hear in there is oftentimes, and what I hear from my clients is a generational expectations gap. A lot of baby boomers, a lot of Gen Xers grew up in that work environment where you came in, you maybe had 3 hours of meetings a week to connect
Mm,
and collaborate and create alignment. Work was much different then. The way work got done, what the work was, in the 80s and 90s and early 2000s, when we were running waterfall. It
mm,
was very different. And that's not the nature of work. It doesn't lend itself to speed necessarily or creativity, which most of our workplaces
mm,
now demand. I'm with you 110%. I think that agile methodology of it's not about the meeting, it's about creating alignment. I think that's what we don't talk
mm,
enough about when we talk about meetings is what's the intention of gathering these people together? Instead, we just say, let's have a meeting and expect some magical outcomes to come. Your intentionality behind those processes are exactly what we follow as well. And one of the things that I think is important in alignment is let's, and we do this on my team all the time without judgment, break down the definition of that word for me to make sure we're on the same page.
mm,
That's alignment. Like, is the way you're using, so for example, my team and I were going over a program process flow this morning, that my client success manager had mapped out in Mural for us. And I was using a certain word, and forgive me, I forget what it was, but he goes, here's how I would use that word. Is that what you're intending to communicate? I was like, absolutely. Because we all miscommunicate in the workplace by using the same word but hearing different definitions. Those
mm.
kinds of conversations in meetings can make or break project success or slow it down by 3 weeks when we didn't know that we were slowing it down. So I'm in full agreement with those alignment conversations because I think those are mission critical to doing really great work together.
Um, what do you like? So let's talk about the actual. Actually, let's take us to be a little more strategic. When do you see the value of meetings? What are the things that you would look for to encourage a company to, whether it's a regular cadence on a topic or whatever. Like, when are the times that a company should be actually for sure having meetings?
Yeah. So in my mind, I think of meetings in three different buckets. One is brainstorming, two is decision making, and three is legit information sharing as part of a purposeful communications plan. Too much of meetings are taken up with status updates that we need to move into Loom or, video updates beforehand or project management systems, which I know y'all are really good at, and that is your
Mm,
specialty. So when it comes to brainstorming, is someone how you know you're getting value is that the facilitator facilitated a conversation that produced value, ideas, collaboration that's better than the sum of the individuals in that meeting, or help the group come overcome a roadblock. So for example, when I facilitate a meeting with our clients, because I'm there as their coach, I'm there to help them get over roadblocks. What I will hear and what they will give me feedback on is very productive is, oh, well, we got to the heart of the problem. We didn't just brainstorm solutions. In American work culture, we love to brainstorm solutions without identifying the problem that we're actually solving for. So anytime people can come together and have a conversation that is deeper than what was intended or really identify the problem or really get to, do a root cause analysis of a cultural issue.
mm,
Fantastic use of time because you all have just saved yourselves miscommunication, mistiming, misunderstandings. That all takes up company time that delays the actual work product at play. Anytime decisions are made in a meeting with an individual responsible and a deadline, awesome use of meeting time, very specific, clear call to actions. I do not believe that a decision without a person being responsible and without a deadline is actually a decision. It's just a statement. And obviously, that person has to follow through. And if they don't follow through, that's an accountability problem. That's not a meeting problem. That's a whole other set of tools you use to solve that. And then when it
Mm,
comes to information sharing, I do believe that there are places where key leaders, and sometimes it's the executive, sometimes it's other leadership roles, need to use a gathering of people to convey information. They just need to make it very clear that this is an information sharing meeting. And next week we'll have a Q&A session on it, or sometimes you can have the Q&A session at that same time, but announce the intent, because delivering messaging in human form coming out of someone's mouth is very, very effective and does accomplish connection and clarity in a way that the written word cannot.
mm. And so going into meetings, what are some of the like the bad things you see? What are some of the things that you're like, oh, I can't believe the companies are holding these types of, meetings.
Oh man, my list of pet peeves is long. My probably number one pet peeve is a bulleted agenda that is just a list of words, like
Mm,
timeline, project outcomes, budget. Like, what about those are we
right.
talking about? What data are we reviewing beforehand? That is probably my number one pet peeve. And that is probably 95% of the agendas that I see in work environments, because there is zero framing to any of that. And so no one knows like what angle you're actually going to talk about those problems. Um, Second, that's probably second only to a meeting without an agenda, or just the agenda is discuss the project.
Mm,
Which part of it? Are we celebrating good things? Are we only talking about things that are bad? Like, we need, in order again to use very valuable time in the best way, we must focus the conversation. And the more context you give to humans, the better they can participate. And that goes for extroverts and introverts alike, but humans deserve prep information, prep time, so that they know what to expect when they come into the meeting, and they know what decisions they're going to be asked to be made. Everyone has different relationships with their speed of decision making, the type of decision making that they do,
mm,
so that prep work can really help um, everyone make the same type of decision at the same time, which I think is mission critical. Um,
yeah.
yeah.
Oh, well, no, continue if you got more
Oh,
there, because
oh
mine's
God,
going to take
yeah.
a slightly different angle. So yeah,
Oh,
continue.
yeah. I was gonna say, just in terms of pet peeves, inviting too many people, not inviting the right people. There's a lot of cultures that have a
Mm,
consensus-based culture, which is
mm,
the fastest way to get nothing done, right? So everyone gets to weigh in, but no one's asked to really buy in, and no one's asked to make commitments to move forward. And so when you have
mm,
too many people in a meeting, it just creates messiness and miscommunication. Obviously, when you don't invite the right people to the meeting to help brainstorm or make a decision or receive the information, that's a miss there.
mhm,
I would say when you end a meeting and you talk about a lot of things, but no one circles back to say, what did we decide here? What have we committed to? What are our next steps? Even if it's a brainstorming meeting, and even if you decide to kill a project, there should be a decision and next steps to kill the project. And the facilitator needs to take responsibility for closing the loop there, so that everyone understands decision made, next steps, who's doing what, and by when, so that change can happen, so that things can move forward. So those are some of my
mm.
top ones. I'll get off my soapbox now.
No. Well, what do you think? Like, how do you create an atmosphere of healthy meetings? Because while I haven't actually experienced a lot of negative ones, I have heard about toxic meetings, or even maybe there are meetings where people don't say what they really mean to want to say for whatever
Yes.
reason. What is your experience around that?
Yeah, so let's pick up on that one, because that is very common. It's called the meeting after the meeting, where people say what they really
Mm,
think, how they really feel, their real perspective. That
mm,
is not a meeting problem, it is a trust problem. And so, if we're going to solve the trust problem, we need mechanisms to build trust so that people feel psychologically safe to say what they're really thinking, of course, in a professional way. And many employees need some training on how to communicate professionally when they disagree or when they want to amplify something that is working. So, those are two areas that we could upskill our employees in, both professional
Mm,
communication in the moment. What do you need for your personality in order to do that? And then building psychological safety and trust inside of an organization. And psychological safety is simply the ability to disagree without fear of repercussions. Too many leaders say that they admire and want more innovation, and then they reward compliance. So making sure that
mm,
our leaders are not rewarding compliance, probably unconsciously, right? But instead, they're
right.
truly rewarding innovation, speaking up, getting it wrong, trying new things. And then trust in the workplace is simply the ability to say, I don't know, I don't have it figured out, I messed up. Can you help? That's
Mm,
trust in the workplace. And so if you are having folks that have the meeting after the meeting, you as a leader, dear leader, need some more mechanisms to build trust and probably slow down your meetings, create more space so that there's more room for conversation, more room for thought in the meeting. If people
mm.
are exhibiting bad behaviors in the meeting, like talking over people or taking credit for other people's ideas, as the leader, you must call that out in the moment to help stifle those bad behaviors to create more room for positive behaviors. It feels like junk. No one likes to do it. But as a leader, that's part of your responsibility is to reinforce a culture of good behaviors where people can work together and be seen, heard, and understood.
One of the things I think sometimes it's hard to advance when it comes to change is, um, especially if there's no, like, you're at the top, right? And there's nobody else to overrule or make a
Yeah.
decision, is when you are in a disagreement and you don't agree on way forward. Do you have, I know that's a little off of the meetings, but it's still around that change. Like, how do you get alignment when it doesn't feel like alignment's possible?
Oh my gosh. No, I think that's what you just teed up, I think are at the heart of what should be happening in our meetings, right? Like
Mm,
identifying who's making the decision, why they get to make the decision, and then creating alignment in our meetings. Like those
mm,
are like some of the most valuable ways to spend our time together. So when it comes to decision making, there are actually five different, at least, but I teach five different ways of how a group or a team can make decisions. In American work culture, we love to rely on the authority one. So the person with the biggest title gets to make the decision. But I think it displays the utmost humility when a leader is willing to say, I'm not the best person to make this decision because Sally works on this problem every single day. And so she's going to get our input and she gets to make the decision. Or Tim is our subject matter expert on this project. And so he's going to get our input. He's going to make the decision. Name the decision maker at the front of the meeting or the project. And then as a leader, you're gracefully stepping out of that. Leaders obviously have to be very conscientious to not talk first because then the group tends to follow
mm,
their lead and say, oh, yes, CEO, yes, we want what you want because of
mm,
groupthink and tribalism and those kinds of things. So leaders need to be very conscientious when they insert their opinion. It's oftentimes best for them just not to attend the meeting, and the group is more likely to say what really needs to be said and move forward. So those are my thoughts. And I can share more with listeners if they're interested, if they want to reach out on the other or on the five decision making roles that we can have. Um, but I think that's one way. And then the piece about alignment inside of a meeting, it's
mhm,
mechanisms for that is as the facilitator, just being willing to say, I'm not sure we're talking about the same thing here. Or when a meeting goes off the rails and you're sitting there going, what are we taught? Like, I'm so lost in this conversation. I don't care if you're the
mm,
facilitator or not. Just be brave enough to be like, excuse me, I'm lost. Could we like circle back to the heart of the issue? Like, what are we talking about really? Um, for one person to be brave enough to say that out loud can change the course of the meeting. And everyone on the inside is going, oh my God, thank you, John, for doing that. Because I had no idea why I was here and what we were talking about. We need more of that bravery in our meetings, I think.
Mm. Um, oh no, I lost my question. No, that can't happen. Well, that's too bad because it was a good one too. Well, so if you had your wish list, right, of heading into meetings, or like, the dream company,
Yeah.
what would those meetings look like?
Well, I think first and foremost, meetings would run. Excuse me, let me start that over. Meetings would run on a cadence with intentionality. I'm a big
Mm,
fan right now of kind of this um quarterly sprint or quarterly march through. And again, it's all agile stuff, but I think it's highly effective across multiple industries and multiple functions. Starting with a quarterly 90-day march that's connected to your annual goals. In the next 90 days, what are we going to accomplish? And having a meeting around that to create agreement and collaboration to say, this is our annual goal. So in this quarter, this is what we have to accomplish. What do we need to align where there are expectations that haven't been stated or need to be integrated into our work? Who is doing what?
mm,
What does success mean at the end of the 90 days? How are we going to celebrate? And then you do that for at the start of every calendar month as well. So you set it for the quarter. Again, you run another meeting for the month, and then you run your one-on-ones with your team biweekly or weekly to again create alignment, make sure that they don't have any roadblocks inside the department or with other departments that you might need that you might be able to mitigate for them. And there will be smaller meetings that come out of those meetings, but you will cut the number of meetings that you need as a team and as individuals in half if you were to be
mm.
more proactive by running a 90-day march, running a monthly priority meeting, running a biweekly prioritization meeting, and then having those daily syncs, as you mentioned, to create alignment to say, here are my top 3 priorities for today. How does that align with what other folks need to accomplish today and this week? And if I need to shuffle to help you meet your goal, I'm going to do that. I'm going to ask you to do the same. That's the intention of those meetings. Like that level of proactivity will solve 75% of your communication challenges, your misalignment problems, people working on different priorities across different departments at different times. That's unbelievably frustrating to people. That level
Mm.
of proactivity needs brought back into our organizations because I feel like we've lost sight of that in this kind of panic stricken, oh my gosh, everything has to change all the time. We have all these priorities. We're not in the throes of the pandemic anymore, but people are still running a lot of work like we are. And we need to get back
Mm.
into being proactive, controlling the controllables, choosing our future, and running those types of meetings will get us back in the driver's seat for our priority list.
So, what are your thoughts then around? Because one of the things you mentioned the pandemic, and
Yep.
I've worked remote since 2014, and so for the pandemic itself wasn't much of a change. But one of the things that I think about, since going remote, was, you know I really like, so not around being that unhealthy, not having the conversation in the meeting, but all the things that happen outside of a meeting because you bumped into each other, right? So not so much intentional, but just those water cooler conversations, whether it's rapport building or, oh hey, this happened. Or actually, one of the things that happened to me a lot when I worked in an office as a project manager, I'd hear other project managers on the phone and them talking about their projects and realizing that what they're talking about actually might have an impact on what I'm doing, which
Mm,
it's really hard, it's accidental information.
yep.
Any thoughts on that in today's world?
Yeah. You know, um, this sounds so goofy to say, but it works if you let it. And that is intentional connection time. So using a quote unquote
Mm,
meeting or using part of a meeting to just connect very informally. I start almost all of my meetings in a very goofy kind of way because it just gets people warmed up and talking
mm.
and, hey, tell us something good that's going on in your life or at work, whatever you want to share. Um, I for our more driven,
I was
results
gonna say
focused,
you have
task
to put
oriented.
that in the agenda or something for me because I
I
feel like
know, I
this
know.
is not what we're here to talk about.
I know, I know. I totally get it. And my husband's called me
Mm,
out sometimes. He's like, I hear you on meetings and you spend too much time like joking around at the beginning. And I was like, or creating time for us to be humans. But okay, yeah, I get it. I get it. So there's definitely a piece of that. Again, nothing will ever, ever, ever replace in-person working together ever. So
mm,
companies, I think, have to create um, spaces for folks to physically gather. I mean, we're human beings. We
mm,
evolved around a campfire together. Nothing will ever replace that. And then when it comes to that kind of informal learning and data gathering, in you just hearing somebody on the phone being like, "Oh shoot, I need to make sure we're plugged into that."
mhm,
Unfortunately, I think the only answer is making sure absolutely all work is visible in a project management system. I know no
mm,
other way around it. Um, except for the informal, like, hey, what you got going on? Creating space and time for that. I think those two extremes are now what virtual work will ask of us.
mm.
I could be
Yeah.
dead wrong, but those are my
Um,
thoughts.
yeah, it's funny because yeah, I kind of feel like how your husband does. Like, there's a team, ironically, a team, the change team on a project that I'm associated with, and they get on the call, and I'm just like, the first 10 minutes they're talking about how the dog won't eat its food and all the different types of homemade food they're making. And I'm just like, oh my goodness, this is a 30-minute meeting. Can we get on with what we need to talk about? But I do also understand, like, the intellectual side of me understands, the connection that can create, but the my personality type has a really difficult time with it.
Oh, yeah, totally get it. Totally get it. And I think that's um what we can do better jobs of as leaders, regardless of our title, is creating intentional icebreakers related to the work.
Mm,
I hate the word icebreakers. Meeting openers is another generic term, right? Everyone hears icebreakers and they're like, like groan, right? Totally get it. But framing that connection in something work related can help balance the two perspectives, I think.
mm.
Just to get people's, creative juices flowing before you get into the topic so it doesn't go off the rails about homemade dog food. I would also, yeah, because especially for those who don't have a dog and are never going to make homemade dog food for their dogs, there's like, oh, spare, like, oh my God, get me out of here.
Yeah. Or that if it could be the same person dominating the conversations as well.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. No, I
Yeah.
totally get it. I'm one of those too. Like I just adopted a newborn son, and he's the cutest thing on the
Oh.
planet, and I adore him. I don't enjoy sitting around talking about my kid or other people's kids, So we were like,
Mm.
let's talk about our
Yeah.
kids. I was like, I don't want to. I love my kiddo, but I'm not going to tell you the intricacies of all the diapers
Mm.
I changed yesterday.
Right. Right. For what he spit up for. Yeah.
No, right? Like, no, nope. Does not meet my life's purpose. So let's move on.
What would you say then is the biggest message you'd want to get across around how like the catalyst for change, and how having those healthy conversations, whether it's in meetings or town halls or whatever? Is there anything you have in mind there?
I want to make sure I understand your question before I answer, but are you
Mm,
asking, what what to
maybe
think
the
about?
ROI.
Yeah, ROI
Right,
on
like,
meetings for change?
mm, mm,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yep, yep, yep. Um my brain thinks in very simple terms. And every, in the workplace, we've been brought together to deliver value together as a team, as a group, as an organization. And that value can be put into numerical form by way of our salaries and how much we cost an organization and how much value we deliver an organization. Successful businesses run when every role is getting 4 times the value of the cost for an employee. And I'm not trying to deduce everyone down to a dollar figure, but it's a
Right.
simple way to kind of measure effectiveness. And if a meeting is not getting 4 times the value of the people brought together, you shouldn't have had it. I really do believe it is as
Mm.
simple as that. And if we use that as our screening mechanism for meetings, I would bet my life savings that everyone listening in would probably attend at least half as many meetings as they currently do. The
Interesting.
the value that we're getting from our meetings is just not there currently because individuals and facilitators are not willing to make themselves uncomfortable to say, you know what, I accept this invitation because I have a fear of missing out. I don't need a fear of missing out. I'm gonna step away. I don't need to be there. We need to be more self-reflective about why we insist on being at meetings, having meetings,
Mm.
leading meetings, talking too much in meetings. I really do not understand why we continue to let these poor behaviors that are detracting from our impact in a company to continue.
Mm. What about the intangible value? Because so one meeting came to mind for me. We have a fortnightly, every other week meeting. That's like all the key leadership in our company.
Mhm.
And yes, we do go around and it's about giving kind of key updates because we don't all have visibility into what's going on. But
Yeah.
a lot of that meeting is actually what we were talking about before, where it is just this space where people joke around and tell funny stories because it's a global company, right? So this is
Yep.
the global leadership coming together. And so it's almost like a time of connection, right?
Yep.
And so there's some intangible value there because the update, I think they're important, but they could have probably been in an email, right?
Yep.
But if it was in an email, our sales guy in the US would never probably talk to, our country lead in Australia. Um, so what are your thoughts about that intangible value and maybe measuring that a little bit?
Yeah, I agree that there's high value in that. I wouldn't say it's intangible at all because what you all are doing is actually you're greasing the wheels of the speed of trust. And the speed of trust has a lot to do with rapport. And the thing that solidified my perspective on that is I had the opportunity to have an audience with the former CEO of Jupiter Networks, the backbone
Mm-hmm.
behind the internet, the folks that you're in tech, you probably know what this is. I just remember his story because I was like, holy crud, this is real. And this was like, let's say 2018. And I was at this executive leadership retreat with a lot of other IT leaders. And he said that when he took over as CEO, there were 20 of these providers. And by the time that he left, 10, 12 years later, there were only 6 left. And he chalked up his company's success to their speed of trust. And their speed of trust was directly related to their ability to gather, try new things, fail fast, admit when they didn't have all the answers or have it all figured out, and then come back together and try again. Like
Mm,
that stuff is real and it's more real, and trust is higher, and we can go faster together when we trust each other because we know the human being that we're working with across the table, across the screen, whatever it is. I believe in that stuff.
mm. Yeah, absolutely. Well, cool. This has been a fun conversation. I'd love to hear what 3 things you want to leave top of mind.
I would say top of top of mind to share. Number one, say no to more meetings. Be brave and say no to more meetings that you're invited to or asked to hold unless you know why you're there and why and how you can contribute value. So number one, say no to more meetings. Super unpopular opinion. Number two, I'm going to say commit to being a better participant and leader in meetings. Refuse to have the meetings after the meetings. Commit to saying what you really think and feel about ideas when you're all together. Commit to doing the prep work necessary to be a great leader or participant. Commit to being brave in those meetings and say what you know everyone else is thinking, but no one else will say out loud. Like, you will move things along. You will be perceived as a stronger leader. And then I would say number 3, if you're having any of those challenges, I would love to chat about how to solve for it. Trust, psychological safety, how meetings should be contributing to your bottom line, or top line revenue. It's not as like direct as that, but it can be. If you feel like change is stuck in your organization, these are all skills that everyone in your workforce can learn to do differently. And I'd love to be considered in helping you do that.
Awesome. Well, how can folks get in touch with you or learn more about what you do?
Yes. So our website is thechangearchitects.com. And you can check out our perspective and our podcast and the CIOs and leaders that we highlight over there through the Hot Mess Hotline. And if you like the cut of our jib, you can get in touch.
All right. Well, thank you so much for being on the show, Stefanie.
Thank you, Jana. Good to meet you.
Yeah. And to our audience, until next time, keep your organizations healthy.